Hey, what is up, mortals? It is. Welcome to part 3 season 3 of What If Deku Had Haki. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. So, we begin. Everything was silent, and the world stood still. Dust was still hanging in the air, making it hard to see the full battlefield. But Izuku didn't need to see the entire battlefield in order to know that things had turned for the better. Standing in front of both him and a deflated All Might was a man he knew all too well. It was Rayleigh. And he looked like his usual goofy self. The silver-haired geezer turned his gaze towards his student and All Might to check on their condition. He could see that they've both taken some hits, but nothing they had was life-threatening. The only things that concerned him were the fact that All Might had revealed his skinny form to the public, and the villain that had forced him to do so. Rayleigh turned his expression forward once more, straight at the well-dressed villain he had deflected upon entering the scene. All for One rose up from the smoke and rubble, revealing that he was basically unharmed. The only thing that hinted at any form of damage was his now broken mask. Other than that, there wasn't a single scratch on him. Rayleigh frowned upon seeing this, for his hunch had been correct. He thought of the possibility the second that he sensed the presence of this villain, but this just confirmed what he had theorized. This villain, who was already powerful in his own right, could use Haki. All for One locked his gaze onto Rayleigh, almost frowning, as he said, I see, you're the old man that got into Mura's way. I assume that boy is your student. With an ominous voice, while pointing towards Izuku, Rayleigh felt a shiver run down his spine upon hearing this man speak. He was pure evil, not a single hint of good within him. It was to the point that not even Rayleigh could consider him to be human. The silver-haired geezer quickly shoved it off, as he responded to the villain. Yeah, he's my student all right. And you're severely mistaken if you think that I'll let you have your way with him, Rayleigh shouted, letting a hint of anger seep into his voice. All for One sighed upon hearing this, as he simply raised his arm and said, very well then. Let's see how you fare, Agai, but was cut off when Rayleigh charged in and swung his sword. The villain didn't see this coming, and was forced to back off in a panic. He didn't have enough time, however, for a disgusting and fleshy thud could be heard the second that he distanced himself from Rayleigh. Everyone looked towards the ground and saw something that shocked them all. It was an arm, one that was previously attached to All for One. No one knew how to react to this, because it was unbelievable. Rayleigh's Haki-infused sword had actually managed to sever the flesh and bone of a villain that not even All Might could put a scratch on. Izuku looked at this in shock, until he raised his eyes towards both Rayleigh and All for One and grinned. Has anyone told you that you talk too much? Rayleigh then said, sounding like he was mocking his opponent. All for One grunted upon hearing this, as he slowly lowered his stump of a right arm. The villain then turned his gaze over to Rayleigh, without saying anything this time, charged into battle. The duel was destructive, and it was dangerous. Izuku could tell that it would be critical if Rayleigh got hit by All for One, even if it was just once. The green-haired boy observed the battle in awe, watching Rayleigh's elegant sword strikes clash with All for One's devastating hits. The duel raged on, almost showing that both fighters were equal. Rayleigh then swung his sword towards his opponent's chest, going for a finishing blow. All for One saw this coming, and used his fist to disrupt the path of the sword. The blade missed its target, but Rayleigh wasn't giving up. The silver-haired geezer then swung a Haki-infused fist towards All for One's chest, looking like he was putting everything behind it. Izuku saw this happen and knew what it meant. Rayleigh was trying to end the fight as quickly as possible. The green-haired boy watched Rayleigh's fist close in on its target, certain that it would do the trick, but then something bad happened. It stopped. Rayleigh's fist stopped short, just before it made contact with its target. Did he pull his punch? Izuku muttered to himself in panic, thinking that Rayleigh had miscalculated and been just 1 inch off. What happened next shocked both him and All Might down to their cores. All for One was thrown back, bleeding from certain parts of his body, as if he had been hit by the heaviest punch on the planet. Izuku was now confused, for he couldn't understand what was happening. Rayleigh hadn't made any form of contact, yet it had caused an incredible amount of damage. It was as if the Haki from his fist had flowed outside of his body and into All for One. Just what was going on? The green-haired boy turned his shocked expression towards his master, who in turn went to face him. The old man was still smiling, and to everyone watching it was apparent that All for One was out of commission. Izuku smiled when he saw this, glad that everything turned out okay. His expression quickly turned into a horrified one when he sensed something. Izuku's eyes went wide as he shouted, "Look out!" In a panic, Rayleigh looked confused at first, until he looked as horrified as Izuku when also sensing what was coming. the silver-haired geezer turned around with haste. But it was just in time to get impaled by a spear-like bone. Izuku's eyes went wide with even more horror, and a form of despair even filled them to the brim. He and All Might were forced to watch as the thought to be unconscious All For One impaled Rayleigh in the side of the stomach. Before lifting him up in the air, they were both despaired by this scene, but it hit All Might differently than it hit Izuku. The blonde hero recognized this type of wound, and it hurt to just look at. It was similar, if not the same, to the injury that he had suffered when he last faced All For One. All Might grunted in pain, recognizing what Rayleigh was feeling right now. All For One raised Rayleigh up in the air. Looking at him as he did, the silver-haired geezer coughed a bucket's worth of blood. As the villain raised his sinister voice, "I think your time is up, old man," All For One said, before throwing the silver-haired geezer to the ground. "Rayleigh," Izuku shouted in more panic. As the silver-haired geezer slid across the ground and over to Izuku and All Might, the green-haired boy quickly helped his master sit up. But the old man barely gave a response to anything that he said. Izuku was gripped by terror, thinking that Rayleigh was on the verge of bleeding out. His terror then quickly turned into rage. As he stood up and faced All For One, "You'll pay for that," the green-haired boy shouted, consciously letting weak waves of his spirit shoot and attack All For One. The villain barely reacted to Izuku's intimidation, as he calmly said, "If you wish to die with your precious master and All Might, be my guest." Before something changed within him, it wasn't just Izuku that could sense this. Even All Might and the half-conscious Rayleigh could sense what was happening. All For One's power was going through the roof, sending a pressure that threatened to crack the earth itself. The villain's remaining arm transformed into an abomination of quirks, before something else happened to it. All For One then coated the entire thing with armament Haki, making its aura even more menacing than ever before. Izuku could feel his stomach dropping at the terrifying display of power. Not only was All For One using an abundance of powerful quirks, he was also using Haki so powerful that he would give even Rayleigh a run for his money. The villain then stared Izuku down before charging. The green-haired boy didn't have much time to react. As he raised his Haki-infused arms into a cross, the two then clashed, sending a wave that was far greater than anything ever before. Izuku gave it his all, holding All For One back to protect the old men that were standing behind him. All For One, however, was doing the same, and he wasn't going to let a kid stop him. The clash continued, with Izuku being pushed back repeatedly before slowly regaining his ground. This angered All For One. As he put more power behind his assault, Izuku responded by firing his spirit out in the form of a wave, aiming to knock All For One out. The villain sensed this conqueror's spirit and snickered as he responded by using his own. The two spirits clashed, sending an additional wave outwards. At first they were equally matched, but it quickly became clear that Izuku didn't stand a chance against All For One. The green-haired boy could feel how his strength slowly faded away from him, and he was being pushed back more and more. He was struggling to keep standing up and was ready to fall at any moment. But that is when he felt a hand on his shoulder supporting him. He quickly turned his gaze in that direction, until he saw something that shocked him. "Rayleigh," the green-haired boy exclaimed. The silver-haired geezer looked drowsy, as he clutched his wound while forcing a smile through it all. "Let's fight him together." "Izuku," the old man shouted, before firing his own spiritual wave towards All For One. The conqueror's spirit of both Rayleigh and Izuku combined into one. As it fought against All For One, it was working. They were actually matching All For One. They were even pushing him back a little. The master and student gave it their all, pouring all of their heart into this one clash. But it still wasn't enough. All For One quickly regained the upper hand and proceeded to push both Izuku and Rayleigh back. The master and student gritted their teeth through the entire process, trying their damnedest to fight back against All For One, but it didn't work. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't stand up to the monstrous villain that was All For One. Izuku began losing more and more of his strength, to the point that he couldn't focus. His vision started getting blurry, and he began seeing double on top of it. The green-haired boy was slowly losing his consciousness in an attempt to fight against this villain, and it still wasn't enough to defeat him. Izuku was about to black out when he suddenly felt another hand on his other shoulder. The boy slowly regained some of his vision as he looked to see who it was. When his vision became clearer, he could see a skeletal All Might standing up next to him. The green-haired boy was almost worried, wondering what the blonde and broken hero was trying to do. He was surprised, however, when All Might bellowed and something came out of him. It wasn't just Izuku that was shocked. Neither Rayleigh nor even All For One could believe what they were seeing. All Might wasn't just standing there and helping Izuku stand up. he was adding his own power to the clash. The broken hero was actually using Conqueror's Haki. Both Izuku and Rayleigh were speechless, for they didn't know what to say. All Might had been able to use Haki this whole time. He just didn't know about it until now. The blonde hero then turned towards the baffled master and student, before saying, together, with a firm voice. The master and student shook off their bewilderment, before adopting firm expressions of their own and responding. Together, the trio then turned back to All for One before bellowing. Now it wasn't just two spirits fighting against one. It was three heroic spirits fighting against one single villainous spirit. All for One was being pushed back, grunting in pain as he did. He couldn't keep up with the three spirits clashing against him. The villain was eventually knocked back, staggering and stopping his use of Haki completely. The trio looked at each other before they signaled that it was time to end this. All Might mustered whatever he had left of One for All, channeling it into one massive United States of Smash. Rayleigh mustered whatever power he had left to channel another one of those weird attacks that he used earlier. Izuku was barely clinging to consciousness as he reached far behind him before shouting, Red Hawk, with a hint of desperate rage. As all three of them swung towards the defenseless villain at the same time, the collision created a blast, before it erupted into a fiery tornado that was oozing spiritual energy. Then it all subsided, stopping as quickly as it appeared. The battlefield was covered in dust and smoke, cloaking anything that was standing within it. The dust slowly cleared, first revealing a battered and unconscious All for One on the ground. Then it cleared further, revealing a standing trio of Rayleigh, Izuku, and All Might. The trio stood dead still for the longest time, until they finally moved. Rayleigh and All Might mustered what little they had within them to raise one of their fists into the air, while Izuku used the last of his energy to bellow to the sky. The spectators, and everyone watching, cheered for the fighters, relieved that everything turned for the better. Izuku kept roaring to the heavens, until he lost what little energy he had left. The green-haired boy fell limp and unconscious, before tumbling backwards. He was caught by both Rayleigh and All Might before hitting the ground, and they held him up proudly. You did well, Rayleigh then muttered to his unconscious student, painfully grunting as he did. I'm counting on you, All Might then muttered to the green-haired boy. The two old men then looked at each other, before smiling widely. They both knew that a future with Izuku as a pro hero was the best future they could ever hope for. After the battle ended, the pros on the scene were quick to act. All for One was locked away. The civilians were rescued, and All Might, Rayleigh, and Izuku were taken to a hospital. The trio had taken some damage, but they would recover. What followed was All Might announcing his retirement, and UA establishing their new dorm system. Many parents were hesitant about letting their kids continue in the hero course, but most decided to accept. Izuku's mom was one of the hesitant ones, but she didn't hesitate to accept when UA's latest faculty member made himself known. After that, the students moved into their new dorms, and were quickly run down on the different rules. They then got to unpacking and settling in, which eventually led to a bunch of bickering about Izuku. The green-haired boy was told to go and see Aizawa immediately after unpacking, and many of the students wondered why. There were a few that already had an idea, those being Uraraka, Ida, Katsuki, and Todoroki, and they were thinking that Aizawa had to punish Izuku for his repetitive acts of recklessness. What Class 1 didn't know, however, was that Aizawa was asking Izuku for help. An interesting piece of information had come to the attention of both him and the rest of UAS faculty, which in turn led to them having to incorporate special methods of training in order to cope with the sudden shift in society. Izuku was brought there to share his opinion, for he was one of the most knowledgeable in this matter. He could give the input that they needed, because now push had quickly turned into shove. The following day, all of Class 1 was told to put on their hero costumes and go to Ground Gamma for training. Upon doing so, they saw that more or less every teacher at UA was there waiting for them. Sir, what exactly will we be training today? Ida asked, in his usual manner. Aizawa looked more tired than usual, for the planning had kept him up longer than he thought. You'll be inventing your super moves, but that is only the second priority for some of you, the tired teacher said, before yawning loudly. The students looked at each other confused. Who are the ones that would be given a different task, and what task would that be? These questions were quickly answered when Aizawa spoke up once more. Midoriya, Ida, Uraraka, Kirishima, Bakugo, and Todoroki. The 6 of you will be training with our newest teacher here at UA. The rest of you can get started on your super moves immediately. Midoriya, you've already been told on what to do, so you can also begin right away, the tired teacher said, sounding like he could pass out at any moment. Class 1 had just had more questions now. Why were these specific people chosen? Who is the new teacher? Why did Izuku already know what to do? All these questions swirled between them, until Uraraka voiced at least one of them. "Sir, who is the new teacher?" the brown-haired girl asked, making most of the class's confusion known. Aizawa yawned as if he was annoyed, but he didn't get to answer before someone appeared and said, "That would be me," with a familiar old voice. The class looked towards the source of this voice and saw none other than Rayleigh standing there. "Mr. Rayleigh," Uraraka exclaimed in shock. The silver-haired geezer just wore his usual smile as he calmly answered, "In the flesh." Having gotten one of those questions answered, the class finally split off. Most of the class went to practice their super moves, while the 6 followed Rayleigh to a more secluded part of the training field. Izuku went with them for a while, before he nodded towards Rayleigh and went to do his own thing. "Why isn't Deku training with us, old man?" Katsuki asked, sounding annoyed. Rayleigh continued to smile as he calmly answered, "Because having him train with you is nothing but a waste of time." Everyone reacted to this in a bad way, because in their ears it sounded like Rayleigh was calling them worthless. The silver-haired geezer continued smiling as he continued to speak. "What you're about to do is something he's been doing every single day for the past 10 years. It's to the point that only me and All Might could spar with him. In that sense, it would be pointless for him to train with the rest of you," Rayleigh said calmly. The students quickly calmed down when they finally realized what Rayleigh meant. It wasn't that they were weak, it was that they were weak when compared to Izuku, and that they could accept. They quickly switched gears, however, as Todoroki asked the obvious question, "What exactly will you teach us?" the bi-colored teen asked, with his usual cold voice. Rayleigh's grin grew wider as he happily answered, "I'll be teaching you how to use a hidden power, more ancient than any quirk, a power that uses the will and spirit of its user to let them do spectacular things. The same power that makes both me and Izuku as strong as we are." The group was now frozen, for this was an answer that they didn't expect. It was hard to believe that there was such a thing as a power more ancient than quirks. But Izuku's incredible power is more than enough to prove that it exists. The 6 students widened their ears in anticipation. They weren't just given the opportunity to potentially become as powerful as their green-haired classmate. They were about to find out the secret behind his incredible strength. Rayleigh's grin just grew wider at the students' reactions, as he calmly said, "I'm going to teach you how to use a special power called Haki." Outro. Thank you all for indulging yourselves in the story thus far. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, there are a few more things that I'd like to go over before the video ends. Firstly, we've got a second channel called Anime Deep Dive. Anime Deep Dive goes deep into the facts and lore of a wide variety of anime. It's sure to expand your weeb knowledge for all kinds of series guaranteed. On top of that, we have a third channel called We The Celestials Naruto What Ifs. It's what we do on this channel already, but in the vast world and lore of Naruto. Go check it out if you're in the mood for some jutsu action. Secondly, on behalf of We The Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. Lastly, if you're interested in what we do here at We The Celestials, then I would like to extend out an invitation to join the team. The only caveat being we only accept members 16 years and up to join our crew. You can sign up for whichever category fulfills your interests by joining the recruitment Discord using the link in the description below. Our Discord is an all-around fantastic place to be. Whether you're a fan or looking to join our band of misfits, we're always looking for members to join us. Well, that's it from us for today's video. So, thank you all for watching, and have a great day.